put any questions you have in the chat window. There are only two reasons. Well, there's one major reason if I don't answer, which if you put a question and there's a lot of stuff going by and I don't answer your question, please just type it again. Because if our chat window starts going fast, I usually see things. But if I don't, please don't feel like you're being obnoxious by asking the question again. The second thing I might do is say, hang on, because that is already coming up. And the third thing I might do is ask you to contact me outside of the webinar, which I would be happy to answer any questions if it's something that's really specific that I don't think will be of use to the others who are attending and who are watching the video of this later. So, so please do ask as many questions as come up, and I'm hoping I can remember how to use this interface. And yes, I successfully got to page 2. So please, please let me know who you are. It's always good to know who I'm talking to. Generally, I get a mix of people. It looks like I've got just interested, thinking about it. And all of you can click the little boxes there and we can find out who you are. Okay, so mostly just interested in one person thinking about starting soon. And that's great. And sometimes, though, it's funny when I give beginning homeschooling seminars, sometimes I'll get people who have been homeschooling for over a year. And I think, okay, what are they looking for from me? So it's good that you're all sort of more or less in the same area, thinking about it, want to know more about it, and that lets me know how to tailor the talk. So if you have any specific concerns, please, please do put them up. And I noticed that E.S. Moore says, gifted and talented teacher with precocious preschooler. Yes. The one thing that I'll say about that is that if you've taught before other kids before and then you end up homeschooling your own, you're going to find out that all of that teaching preparation you had, well, some of it will become useful, but less than you might think. Homeschooling is really different. So, so what are your children's ages? That's the next poll question. Find out who you are. Okay, looks like we're the 10s and under crowd. Okay, and that's good too. If those, I will be talking a little bit about, oh, there we've got someone who's got a 10 to 13. I will be talking a little bit about homeschooling high school, but I will not be talking about it too much because I find that people who are thinking about homeschooling who have little ones tend to focus a little too much on the distant future that they have absolutely no control over. And it's much better, you'll be a much more successful homeschooler if you focus more on today than on years down the line. But I will say some very comforting things about homeschooling high school. So, okay, it looks like everybody has answered that one. So who am I? I at one point held the self-bestowed title of world's most reluctant homeschooler. I had never considered homeschooling. I had hardly even heard of homeschooling. I remember that one time at the pool I was talking to a mom and she told me that they were homeschooling because their son had had some sort of chronic illness and had had trouble attending school. So that was, that was my exposure to homeschooling. And then my second child, who was in kindergarten at the time, school didn't agree with her, to say the least. And things really, I really had to face that there was something going on that that was different, that was out of the ordinary, because she had always been out of the ordinary, but her inability to handle a kindergarten classroom was mystifying to me and her teachers and pretty much everyone else. And so I went on this odyssey to figure her out. And that was, I even remember the day so clearly that I sat down very frustrated at my computer and typed into Google, difficult gifted child. and got a hit to the Supporting the Emotional Needs of the Gifted, SANG website. And if you don't know what SANG is, I'll talk about it later, and I'll have a link, so don't worry about looking it up right now. SANG is just this amazing organization that has helped so many parents and gifted people and teachers. So then I started homeschooling her, and lo and behold, I stopped being the world's most reluctant homeschooler because we were having so much fun. We ended up loving it. And my other child, my older child, had been in school and been what I considered successful in school. And in the spring of his 5th grade year, he asked if he could homeschool too. And it turned out that school wasn't going nearly as well for him as I had been trying to fool myself into believing, mostly because I had lots of issues with my younger child, and she kept me very busy. We had a lot of different things like occupational therapy appointments and stuff, and so I sort of was thinking, well, it's good that he's happy at school, and then he confessed that he wasn't happy at school, and so he started homeschooling. He is still homeschooling. My daughter decided after 5th grade, so they sort of flip-flopped, didn't they? After 5th grade, she decided she wanted to try school, and so she's now in 8th grade in a mainstream public middle school. So I am a professional writer and teacher before and after kids. So after kids, I sort of changed what I was writing and teaching. Before kids, I only taught adults. After kids, I started teaching kids. And before kids, I never wrote about education or parenting, obviously. I didn't know anything about it. And after kids, that became my focus. And I put the last thing there, my various other things that I do, to let you know that, in fact, homeschoolers do have time to do other things. And I do a lot of other things, actually. So don't think that when you start homeschooling you give up your life, because you do change your life pretty fundamentally, but you don't give up your life. So what is homeschooling? So this is, I years ago was looking for a picture that sort of typified the classic view of homeschooling that people have, and I found this picture on some, stock photos website, and I thought, oh, it's just perfect, because, the mother's got a book, and she's telling the daughter the right answers. They're sitting at the kitchen table, and the mother's teaching the daughter, and the daughter is docilely accepting this learning from the mother. And the picture on the right is actually my daughter is on the far right in that picture. She's the knight, and those are two of her friends in the front yard, and they were going through this period of being obsessed with knights in the Middle Ages, and they were play acting. And so I took this picture, and this to me really typifies what our homeschool, at least during those years, looked like, being with other kids a lot, being really creative, being not just in the house but out of the house, out in nature, co-op schooling with other kids, all sorts of other things. So when people ask what is homeschooling now, because, if somebody had asked in the 80s, that picture on the left was pretty typical. There was few resources and so few people homeschooling. It was really hard for homeschooling to be anything but the parent and the kid at home sort of replicating school. These days, homeschooling is just what you want it to be. And so everything on this page is something that my kids have done and that pretty much every other homeschooler I know has done. I actually have never met, well, it would be hard to meet them, I suppose. I have never even conversed with a homeschooler who spent their time at home teaching their kids in a 100% pure homeschooling sort of manner. Everyone I know at least does some cooperative learning. Lots of people hire tutors, especially if you have a child who is outstripping your knowledge of something quickly, or if there's something that you don't want to work on with your child. Tutors are great. Community classes. In my community, when someone new comes on the scene offering something interesting, for example, a few years ago, someone from the University of California here in my county a physics professor decided to open up an after-school science center for kids. And she got, somebody put a note about it on our homeschooling email list, and she got bombarded by homeschoolers asking, please, please, please offer some classes during school hours too. And so community classes where I am, because we have a fair number of homeschoolers, are very popular with homeschoolers, and lots of the community teachers in the community who offer art or gymnastics or science or anything under the sun will offer homeschool specific classes now because there's so much demand for it. Mentoring is huge in homeschool. So in school, your kids get stuck with whatever teachers they happen to get, and if you're lucky, you can either choose a school that has the teachers that work for your child, or you might just, it might be just luck of the draw. But in homeschooling, you have to go out and find adults to work with your kids, and mentoring becomes very important. And people do it at a variety of ages, especially with gifted kids. It depends on when they're ready for it, when they're mature enough to get something from a relationship, and also finding the mentor that works for them. But my son has had mentoring relationships both with people who don't live locally, who he meets online, and people who live locally, and it's been really helpful, and my daughter too. Entrepreneurship, both of my kids learn so much from starting businesses. For my daughter, it was she decided to sell tie-dyed clothing, and so we made it into a big lesson. She didn't know it was a lesson, but I said, well, if you're going to be selling things, you have to keep your own books and stuff, because you're going to have to get a loan from me and keep track of how much money you're making and pay back the loan and everything. And so it became a huge part of our homeschooling that year. My son is actually part of a startup, an actual real startup that is incorporated and funded. So it's a huge part of a lot of homeschoolers' lives. Distance education, again, massive part of our lives, because if you can't find something locally these days, you can find it online, which is so wonderful. And I actually teach at Athena's Advanced Academy, which is a distance education online school for sort of, we don't say any particular age range, but upper elementary is where our students the age range is upper elementary. The classes tend to be middle or high school level. Service work, lots of homeschoolers do service work, and it's great because your schedule is so flexible. And then independent study, which lots of gifted kids are very able to do, especially in their areas of passion. They just get out a calculus book and teach themselves calculus. And so when that happens, that's like the greatest homeschooling gift, that you don't have to go out and find anything because your kid is just so self-motivated. And that happens. So the thing about homeschooling to remember is that most schools are more alike than different. So unless you're talking about some really unusual free school up in the mountains in Vermont or something, most schools are more alike than different, whereas each homeschool is as unique as each child. So on the left, again, stock photo of a school. On the right, these are two homeschoolers I know whose mom started homeschooling them because they, like her, are profoundly dyslexic, and her school experience was so emotionally devastating that she decided she didn't want to do that to her children. And so she decided to homeschool her own children, even though she is profoundly dyslexic, and so are they. And so their homeschool was unique in that way, very different in that she was dealing with something that was a major difference from many homeschools, and it was the focus of her homeschool, the reason she was homeschooling. So I always thought that was really interesting to get to know someone who chose to homeschool for an academic reason like that, where she felt that even though she wasn't a trained resource specialist, she felt that it was better for her kids. So people always ask about the legalities, and this is one of those questions I'm going to punt, because homeschooling is legal in every state in the United States. and in many countries around the world. I think we're all Americans here probably, but if you're Canadian, it's legal there. It varies widely. So I'm in California. In California, official homeschooling, there's probably 10 people who are officially homeschooling in this state, and I'm not joking actually, because under our educational code, homeschoolers must be certified to teach the subjects that their children are studying, and so very few people homeschool as a homeschooler because very few homeschool parents are certified teachers. Even if they are, they're probably certified in one area and not the rest of them. And as their child grows, they would cease being certified for their child. So we have a situation in California where we sign. One of the most popular things to do is sign up as a private school, and anyone can do that. A private school can have one or more students, and that's what independent homeschoolers do. So this is not the way it works in many other states. Just giving that as an example of how weird some places the laws are, because there's this idea that people have in the rest of the country that's actually hard to homeschool here. It's actually easy to homeschool in California, easier than in some places. There's no mandated anything for people who register private schools. You just have to register once a year, and that's it. My top recommendation for figuring out the legalities is find your state homeschooling association. And I said, you should note the flavor of homeschooling that homeschooling association promotes, because some of the bigger states and maybe even the smaller states have more than one. In California, we have two. I wouldn't have any problem being in either one. One of them tends to have more of the structured homeschoolers and tends to have a larger population of Christian homeschoolers. The other one tends to have more unstructured type of, free-form type of homeschoolers, but they're both fine organizations. In some states, you might find an organization that really doesn't fit with your personal view of education. So that's why I just said, just do a little research, and if there's more than one, you might have a choice. Possibly consult your state or local Department of Education. The reason I say possibly is that it's amazing how many times I have seen people say that a local or state education official, someone who is supposed to know their state education code, has informed them that homeschooling is illegal and that if they take their child out of school, then they will be charged with truancy. And it's really unbelievable, but this is true. So your state or local Department of Education may or may not know anything about homeschooling in your state. If they do, you're really lucky, and your people in your homeschooling association will be able to tell you, yes, go ahead and go on this page, and here's the explanation of the legalities and what you have to do. Or they might say, don't ask because they're just gonna confuse you. Here's what you need to do. So that's why I say, do your research, and past that, I can't help you. But Hoagie's Gifted, which is a great website, hopefully you know about, and again will be on the links at the end, has a page linking to state homeschooling associations, I believe. So, and I know the homeschool website that I also linked to on the last page. That link will take you to a list of homeschooling associations. So, advantages of homeschooling. First of all of us with gifted children struggle with asynchronous learning, because gifted children, that's sort of the definition, isn't it? That there's something asynchronous about them. They're ahead. Maybe some of your kids are globally gifted. They're ahead academically everywhere, but even a globally gifted 5-year-old is still a 5-year-old in some ways. So asynchrony is something that we deal with on a daily basis, and schools have a terrible time dealing with this because schools tend to be set up with this grade system that ties directly to age. And so you probably, if any of you have tried to get your children accelerated in one or more subjects, know that schools are resistant to this, and that sometimes it can be hard on the kids for a variety of reasons. None of this has any influence in homeschooling at all. Homeschooling is perfect for asynchronous learners. There's no drawback to being an asynchronous learner in homeschooling. And in fact, typically developing kids who homeschool tend to become asynchronous learners because they're just being allowed to develop at their natural rate rather than having to follow the school curriculum. So you'll have a kid who is a typically developing kid who's maybe on schedule for everything when he starts homeschooling in 3rd grade, and then he gets really, really into let's see, what does he get into? He gets into building machines, and he gets really into electronics, and so that leads him into math. And then he's getting way ahead in that, but he resists reading and talking about literature and that sort of thing, and so he's sort of behind there. But in homeschooling, that's not a problem. It's just a natural result of homeschooling. The homeschooling environment is tailored to each child's needs, and so that means that you can figure out how to deal with issues that come up in a way that is not detrimental to your child. And I also wanted to point out that the homeschooling environment is also the physical environment. So if any of you have kids who have sensitivities, as many gifted kids do, I know of numerous families who say that their children were reacting badly to something about the school environment. Maybe the noise, maybe the fluorescent lighting bothers a lot of highly sensitive people. Maybe they had allergies and the school was not helpful dealing with that. All sorts of ways that the homeschool environment can be tailored to your child's needs, and problems that existed in school become non-problems, and you can just forget about them. Students follow their passions. I gave the example of the boy who gets really into building machines. This is something that is part of what you do in homeschool, is to try to find the child's passion, because one of the cool things about teaching through child-led learning, and I'll talk about child-led learning later, is that when kids indulge in their passions and their strengths, their weaknesses get taken along for the ride. And so you don't have to, the way that school sort of bangs on kids' weaknesses, in homeschooling you can emphasize the positive, and the weaknesses can sort of come along for the ride, and you don't have to bang on them as much. And kids who have issues, who have twice exceptionalities, they don't have this daily focus on their deficits, and that can be so much more positive for them in their learning. Flexible lifestyle is just excellent in homeschooling. If you choose to, you can have whatever lifestyle you want to. I've known parents, for example, who have unusual work schedules, and so they both do the homeschooling. They switch off. One of them works, say, from 6 a.m. to noon, and the other one works from noon to 8 p.m. or whatever. And I've known people who have traveled during homeschool, people who have let's see, lived in remote locations. I'm going to look at Jennifer's question here. Yes. Well, the transition back to homeschool is back to school is an interesting question. I'm going to talk about deschooling, and I'll get to that. I'll also talk at that point about transitioning back to school. But the short answer is she did amazingly well. And the real reason for that, again, is this, this thing that I just say over and over, but it's so important. If you are following your child, if your child is driving the bus, then when they make decisions with your support, they are fully invested in those decisions. And so in homeschooling, you can follow child-led learning to the point that your child becomes so self-assured in what they're doing that you'll be amazed at how, even though they're not really more mature globally than any other kid, their decision-making becomes so much more mature because you trust them to make decisions and you trust them to fail and that failure is an important part, as research has been finding, failure is an incredibly important part of learning. And too often, parents don't let their kids fail, and teachers don't let their kids fail, and that's not good for the kids. In homeschooling, you can be there as a support person, and once they learn to make decisions with your support, they become so self-assured. It's really amazing. So she made that choice to go back to school, and it's been really, I mean, of course there have been some bumps, but it has been really a positive decision for her. Creating a positive social atmosphere, I am going to talk about socialization, so I will get to that. And private school education at a lower cost. I have known people who have spent unbelievable, obscene amounts of money at homeschooling. Not obscene, I mean unbelievable amounts of money at homeschooling. But most people spend a lot less than they would on private school. I know that in my case, we never, I mean, we don't live a flamboyant sort of lifestyle to begin with, but we never, I decided that, you know, since I'm taking my kids out of private schools, they've gone private and public, but that, you know, the public schools weren't working for them, so I probably would have had them in private school. I figured there's no way I'm going to reach the $20,000 to $30,000 a year that I'd spend on private school, and so I never said, you know, no, we can't afford to do this class or anything like that. We never even approached a private school cost in our homeschooling. Disadvantages, because there are some. It's a steep learning curve for parents. And a lot of parents get really freaked out at the beginning, and that's normal. But it is a steep learning curve, and you do have to say, okay, I'm going to do this, and it's a large change in your life. One spouse may have to quit or cut down on work. In my case, I didn't, because I had a young child with special needs already. I was only working part-time because of that. Frankly, I had to go to near the end of her schooling career, I had to go to school with her every day anyway because I couldn't find an aide, and so I really wasn't getting much work done anyway. But I do know a lot of people. I have a friend who homeschooled as a single mother. I know people who have just found a more flexible job. I know people who have seasonal jobs and just say to their kids, okay, it's tax season. You're just going to, you know, go to grandma's and play, and our summer is for the next 2 months while I work. And then they homeschool over the summer. So there's a lot of ways that people deal with this, the change in their ability to work. Third point, parents might not feel qualified to teach. And this is something that is really important to understand, that this is a very common feeling. It's an understandable feeling. It is not one that ends up being terribly important in homeschooling these days because there are just so many opportunities to homeschool, to get support homeschooling with distance learning, with homeschool programs, public homeschool programs, with just everything out there. You really don't need to be a qualified teacher. You do, if you live in an area that doesn't have a great public transportation system, you have to be a good chauffeur. I highly suggest you get very, very good at wrangling your digital calendar of choice. I use Google Calendars. My husband, children, and I all share different calendars. So we have a calendar for our household. We have a calendar for each child's educational stuff. We have a shared file system through Dropbox that we use, that my husband and I share certain files, because, you know, this is all very important stuff. You don't have to be a qualified to be a teacher, but you might need to be a bit more of a scheduler than you used to be. Social opportunities have to be sought out. And again, I'm going to have a whole slide about socialization later, but it is true that you could spend your life sitting at home if you're homeschooling. And for me, for example, I'm not a natural extrovert. I don't, you know, if left to my own devices, I usually stay home. I, you know, would rather be at home with my family and a good book and a cat on my lap than out usually. However, when I started homeschooling my daughter, I had to give myself a kick in the pants, say, okay, I got to get out of this house because I need to know other homeschoolers. Disapproval from family, friends, and neighbors is just sort of par for the course. And you can just think of it as character building. And homeschooling can be done cheaply, but as I said, it probably costs more than public school. Though I will tell you, my daughter's been in public school now for, this is her third year, and I like to say in August, welcome to public school, get out your checkbook, because that's what it's like in California. So are any of you moving from school into homeschool is my next poll question. And you can click on the yes or the no box. And one of the things that I'm going to say, although, or I guess since none of you said you were actually planning to homeschool, would you be moving from school to homeschool is I guess the question. So when you start homeschooling, you realize that you have personally inside of yourself, the homeschool writer David Albert calls it this wall that you have built up inside of yourself that school expectations has built. And he talks about homeschooling as you have to take that wall down one brick at a time. And you have all these ideas about what learning is and what teaching is based on school, even if your child is still a preschooler because you probably went to school. I do know some second-generation homeschoolers, but they're very, very unusual. So I'm assuming that you all went to school, and we all have these assumptions. So it's really important to remember that you have a lot of assumptions that really will turn out not to be true once you start homeschooling. Are you afraid you will fail as a homeschooler? And again, since none of you are planning to start right away, you can just say you would fail as a homeschooler. Interesting, we've got quite afraid and not concerned as the most popular ones. I like it. But I like that not concerned is at the top. That's good. Because fear of failure is huge, right? You're taking something, one of the most important things about your child's upbringing into your own hands. And so fear of failure is common, and it's not a problem. It's an important part of why I think homeschooling parents need to seek each other out to get support. So how to start? People always ask, how do you start? Well, I always say, well, just start. Because the fact is that school will always be there. So if you're thinking about homeschooling, you can think for years and years, and then you can start homeschooling. And usually what happens is almost everybody I've ever talked to who thought for years and years about it and finally did it says, oh, I wish I had just started. Why did I agonize for so long? Because school will always be there for you. And I'm going to look at, oh my goodness, we have a former homeschooler here. Excellent. So yes, I actually, when I was writing my book, I never thought of myself as a homeschooler, but then when I started researching how people homeschool high school, I realized I was sort of a homeschooler because I dropped out of high school. I was really, really bored, and I think my mother thought if she didn't get me out of there, I was going to get out of there in an ambulance. And so she just, because I was just so unhappy. And so I ended up going to college early, and so I didn't really think about that as homeschooling, but really that's basically what my son is doing. So, and we're calling it homeschooling. So that's great that we have a former homeschooler here. You can offer some personal feedback if you want in the chat window. You can't predict what your homeschool is going to be like. You really can't. So, as I said, I was the world's most reluctant homeschooler. I had no idea I was going to love homeschooling as much as I did. And so other people are sure they're going to love homeschooling, and it doesn't work out. But if it doesn't work out, school will always be there for you. Now, I know there are some of you who probably have a coveted spot in a gifted magnet program or in a hard-to-get-into private school, and so that adds another level of difficulty to the decision-making. But in any case, some school will be there, and it's important to remember that you can put off homeschooling for a long time. But basically, what I've seen is that I've never heard of anyone saying, "I am so glad we put off homeschooling," whereas so many people I've met have told me, we stuck with that situation way, way too long. It was really not the right thing to do, and I was doing it because I was scared of starting to homeschool. And so a lot of people say, that if they could do it over again, they'd homeschool sooner, not later. So that's what we're thinking about in your decision-making process. So deschooling is the process that homeschoolers, the name that homeschoolers have given to the process of changing from a school-based mindset to a homeschool-based mindset. And you both may need to deschool because the fact is that we all have these ideas of what school is. And for me, my first deschooling aha moment was when my daughter I had taken her out of kindergarten, and I was trying to figure out what I should do with her. And then I thought back to my kindergarten education. And so, of course, I was educated in the 70s, back when kindergarten was a place that you went and you finger painted and you sang songs and the teacher read you stories and you learned how to write your name, and that was about it. I mean, there was no sense of if your child doesn't learn these 30 sight words by the end of kindergarten, he's a failure for the rest of his life, the way that school tends to make parents feel these days, what with all of the emphasis on teaching reading earlier and all the emphasis on testing. And so I realized that I had forgotten that, I graduated from 2 very good universities with an education that started with a year of going to school to finger paint. I remember pretending to take a nap during nap time but never falling asleep. I remember what a pain it was the days that I had ballet after school. I had to wear my leotard under a dress, and so I'd have to take the dress off to pull the leotard down in the bathroom. I mean, these are the sort of things I remember from kindergarten. So, I thought, for me, deschooling was a process of remembering, yeah, I did just fine. I don't have to worry about my daughter, not getting what she needs as long as she's happy. And so deschooling is basically, like I said, the image of taking down this brick wall that you have brick by brick and seeing what the possibilities are. Just being aware that you and your child will need some time. My son, I thought, the one who I thought was doing so well in school, he needed a whole lot more time than my daughter did to adjust to homeschooling. So, and it really took me by surprise. So, and there's a wonderful book called Deschooling Gently, which is on my links page, about this process if you are interested in reading more. So a lot of people ask about leaving school, and I'll also touch a little bit on going back to school here. So including your child in decision-making processes is so important. And this is something that I learned through homeschooling that I never learned through any other parenting information. How much more successful your kids will be at anything if they feel invested in the process. And so, I mean, when you think about it, when you feel like you are not invested in something, like where some authority from on high is telling you have to do something, you're not going to do your best. You know that. And that's the same with children. And so including children, not necessarily with every detail, because we don't want our kids to, for example, feel like there's secrets that they're bringing to school that they can't tell their teacher, that sort of thing. But helping them feel comfortable with the process. Remembering that you don't owe anything to the school. And that was hard for me because I get deeply involved with any school that my kids are at, just because it's sort of like it's like this in my constitution. I don't know. I love schools, which is sort of funny for a homeschooler to say, but I love working with other adults to help educate children. And so for me, it was a hard thing to feel I don't owe anything to the school. I'm going to walk away from this. On the other hand, it's really best not to burn bridges. A lot of parents are so tempted to write a big nasty letter to the only private school for gifted kids that's within driving distance. Best not to do that because you might need them again. You can write the nasty letter and give it to your spouse or your best friend or whatever to read and laugh about, and then throw it away. Be open and honest with teachers if possible. That's my point of view. A lot of times teachers are going to be much more supportive than you thought because they've also been having trouble with your kid, if your kid's having trouble in school. And so they are going to appreciate your asking for advice and support for the most part. Some teachers are not, and you can usually know who those are, and you can just, for them. A lot of people say if you're taking your child out of a really difficult school situation, don't even tell them that you're going to homeschool. Just say, I am enrolling my child in a different school, and walk away. But generally, most people aren't leaving really bad situations. And finally, think of it as a step toward success, not a step away from failure. And so when my daughter decided she wanted to go back to school, I will admit I felt like a big, fat homeschooling failure. It's like, okay, here is this thing I've dedicated myself to and I've written a book about, and she wants to go back to school. Okay. What does this mean to me? And I had to stop thinking of it as a step away from failure and say, this is my daughter's choice. This is her, actually, this picture is her standing in front of her 6th grade school. I took this picture I don't usually have pictures of my kids published anywhere, and so I told her I'm just going to have a picture of her back, and she's and I love that they had all of these motivational signs at this school, and it was very schooly, total anti-homeschool to say be here on time, all day, every day, school where great things happen. So it was sort of ironic that she ended up at a school with all of these motivational posters everywhere. But she ended up doing well because we decided to think of it as a step toward success. It was her choice, and therefore I had to support her. And so I've done what I need to support her, and I will admit that there are some ways in which school does not serve her needs as well as homeschool did. But she's doing well, and she's getting what she wants out of it. So people often ask, what do you do the first day? How do you start this? It's really important to remember that school is separate from everyday life, but homeschool is integrated into everyday life. So this quote here, how do homeschoolers get their laundry done? That was the first question I asked. I ended up enrolling my daughter in kindergarten into a public school program where they would provide a teacher to work with you, and we'd meet once a month, and I could, talk to her all the time because they had in this case it was an independent study program, but it had a little campus, and the kids could go to classes there and do field trips together and stuff. And so I saw the teacher all the time. But when she came to our first meeting, I didn't know her, and this was my first question: how do homeschoolers get their laundry done? Because I had always done stuff like that when the kids weren't home, so I could spend quality time, quote unquote, with them when they were home. But that's because school is separate from everyday life, whereas homeschool is integrated. So laundry just got done with everything else. I had to relax, and that was her answer. She looked around at my house. I just cracked me up so much. She said, well, you might have to relax your standards a little bit because my house was way too clean for a homeschooler's house. And it's true, my house got a lot messier. Have fun, and you see my little asterisk there. Research shows that fun learning is the most effective. So these two girls actually are the same two girls, I think, from the other picture. And this was at our homeschool co-op, and they have whipped cream pies, and we were having a big whipped cream pie fight. And that was integrated into all the other more academic stuff we were doing, too. We'd have stuff like that because having fun is so important. And I love how they wore their swim goggles for their whipped cream pie fight. And my last piece of advice for the first day is don't buy anything. I can't tell you how many people I know who will show up at a homeschool support group or online onto a chat group, a homeschool chat group, and they'll say, I just purchased a full year of this really wonderful curriculum, and everybody else is like, oh no, you spent like $500 on something you're not going to use. And indeed, almost anything you buy, except a museum membership, you probably won't use. So don't buy anything the first day or even the first week. Get to know homeschooling first. And so please, I'm noticing there aren't a lot of questions coming in. I have plenty of room in here for questions, so please keep asking questions if you have them. Typical concerns, should I use a specific homeschooling method? So there are lots of homeschooling methods, and if any of you have done any preliminary research on homeschooling, you probably have made yourself dizzy with clicking links to all these different sites. So you have found out that there are people who do classical homeschooling. You found out that there are people who do unit studies. There are people who do who say they are unschoolers. There are people who do travel schooling. There are so many homeschooling methods, I can't even think of them all. No, you don't have to use any particular method. Almost every homeschooler I know falls under the umbrella term eclectic. That's the word we use because there's a whole variety of needs that even only one child will have. And if you have more than one child, you're going to have even more needs. And so homeschoolers, I notice, this is anecdotal, but I would say this is probably true that homeschoolers tend to start thinking that they're going to use a specific method and tend to move away from that as they become more comfortable at homeschooling and as they come to understand their child's needs more. So for example, my son, who's now 16, is a very gifted computer programmer. He loves programming. He is an unusual techie kid, however, in that he does not love math. He simply does not love math. So for him, it's really important to have a structured math program with a teacher. It was me at first, and then I decided, okay, we got to get someone else in here because this is not working out so great. And so he, when he studies math, always studies in a structured way, whereas he does not study computer science in a structured way most of the time because he's so passionate about it, he does self-led learning. I'm going to look at Jennifer's question. How do you determine what grade your child is in? Yes. So in homeschooling, like I said, even kids who are typically developing kids will start to become asynchronous over the years of homeschooling, and the longer you homeschool, the more asynchronous they may become. And in the case of gifted kids, yes, they are very likely to be ahead academically and thus ready for college, and I'm going to put that in little air quotes, earlier. Now, here's the question. Is your child ready for college in that your child is 14 and saying, I want to apply to Harvard, Stanford, and Brown in the fall as a freshman, and I'm going to major in international relations? If you've got a 14-year-old who's talking like that, you're talking about someone who is ready both emotionally and, well, I assume academically, for the traditional college route. However, most gifted kids are all over the map where this is concerned. We all hear about, we read, if you guys use Facebook and if you're on any gifted lists, oh, you see those articles, don't you? And you think, well, is my kid going to be like that? You know, there was an article recently about a kid who just graduated from, I can't remember where, it is a young teenager, you know, some great university as a young teenager, and it made the rounds of Facebook. And I don't even click on those articles anymore because I've come to learn that you can read those articles and make yourself crazy, or you can look at your own individual kid and try to serve their needs. So in the case of my older child, I never, ever thought that no matter how ready he might be to go off to a four-year university academically at the age of 14 or 15, I never thought he would. And the reason I never thought he would is his personality. He was very reluctant to take college classes at all and would only take them online at first. And it wasn't until, and this, if you have young teens, you might see this happen too. It wasn't until his voice changed and he blended better with a community college population that he was comfortable going into an actual class. So he started community college classes when he was 14, just after his voice changed. So, and I don't think that is a complete coincidence. I think that he is someone who didn't want to stick out, and he also had this idea that college was this big, different thing, and that he wasn't ready for it. And I didn't push him because I didn't think it certainly wasn't anything having to do. I knew that there was this little part of me, the sort of ego parent part of me, that wanted my kid to be one of those kids that gets spread around on Facebook. Look what this 14-year-old is doing. And I had to squash that little part of me, because my job as a homeschooling parent is not to promote my kid for my benefit. It's to figure out what he needs. And so in that case, he's following a typical time frame. He will be applying to colleges when he's 17, but he is going to community college and has been since he was 14. So for a lot of homeschoolers, it's sort of mixed up like that. Like, do you say that he's going to college if he's living at home and taking classes at community college? I don't know. I call it homeschooling. Some people might call it going to college. So it depends. But your child might need to go off to university earlier, and you might have to deal with that. And that's part of having our precocious children. A lot of us worry about whether or not we're keeping up, and that's one of the great things about having a gifted kid who's globally gifted, that you don't have to worry if they spend a year saying, I hate math, I'm not going to do any math. If they were already ahead, you can say, oh, good, thank goodness they were already ahead. So, and if you have a twice exceptional kid or a kid who's behind in some area, you might have a little more reason for concern. But in homeschool, as I said, things are much looser. You don't have to worry so much about being on a schedule. And so the next, I hope I answered your question, Jennifer. You said returning to traditional schooling. Yes, it can be a problem when you go back into school. What I did with my daughter was, when I enrolled her in the public homeschool program, I actually enrolled her a year ahead of her age, so that when she went back to traditional school, she was already accelerated, and they didn't know it, haha. But she's doing fine. She actually could have been accelerated another year with no problem, except for the question of whether a kid would feel comfortable socially, and that's up to each individual child. Did you have any challenges enrolling in the college courses? Okay. Yeah, the whole homeschooling high school thing is another whole conversation that could take us another whole hour, and I'm looking at the clock and thinking we got 6 minutes. So I'm not going to go there, but I'm very happy to go there outside of this webinar. I'll just touch on it and say that homeschoolers do fabulously well at college. Every measure of homeschoolers that can be done, it's a little hard. We're a little hard to find. We're a little squirrely. But every measure that has been done has shown that they do fabulously well in college. And some don't, because they probably wouldn't have done fabulously well in college for their own reasons in any case. Then we get to this question, what about socialization? So I've got Lucy here laughing, because that's what happens when a group of homeschoolers are sitting around and somebody says, well, what about socialization? Everybody starts to laugh. Because, yes, you have to work at creating community, but homeschooling is more community-oriented than most schools. So I personally have to tell you that I never found a group of families that we connected with well at all until we homeschooled. So socialization is not an issue. Also, it's really important to remember that for some children, such as my daughter, less socialization was better. It was more appropriate socialization. She was being stigmatized in school for her unusual behavior. She was starting to draw these little self-portraits with her glasses, and then she'd write bad or sad underneath the self-portrait. It was just heartbreaking. And that's what school socialization was doing to my child. And this was at a school run by Buddhists, and it was a Montessori school run by Buddhists. So it wasn't even a public school where the kids were able to be hard on her socially. She was getting all of that, even though they were trying desperately for her not to get all that. So you never know. You can't make a generalization and say that a child gets socialized better in school. Most children in a healthy homeschool environment do just fine socially. Some of them want more social stuff than you can give them, and then you have to fix it. And How you fix it is up to your individual child. And also remember, your child's social needs will change constantly. So it's hard to predict. Homeschooling, at least, is more flexible than school. So homeschool wisdom, I'm going to cap off with a couple of slides of homeschool wisdom. Focusing on child-led learning, I've talked about that. It's so important to remember that if your children are invested in their learning, if they feel like they're driving the bus, they are going to be so much more successful. And it's really fundamental to homeschooling. And it's the one thing, it is that brick that you take down from your brick wall that is so hard to take down, to trust your child, to follow your child rather than saying this, the Department of Education says you need to learn this, this, and that this year, so that's what we're going to do. If your child says, no, this year I really want to learn this, this, and that, you need to be able to be okay with that to a certain extent. I'm not like a total loosey-goosey homeschooler, and to tell you the truth, there were some things where I put my foot down and I said, you got to learn this. But some homeschoolers don't do that at all. But you can still do that within child-led learning, and I just had to get them on board. And then making lifelong learning your goal. The most important thing that kids see when they're homeschooling is they see all these adults around them excited about learning. I can't tell you how many times I have gone to a homeschooling event where there's been some project to do. The kids go off and play, and the adults are still there doing the project and talking about the book or whatever. I ran a book club. It was so hard to get the parents not to talk because they were all so excited about the book. You may feel like you're not doing enough, and that's okay, and it's normal. You may wonder whether school will be better, and that's okay. It's normal. You may take a long time to adjust, and that's okay because it's normal. All of these things are part of parenting and life as well as homeschooling. Homeschooling just sort of, it magnifies some of these feelings. But what you will do is you will experience joy and wonder at what your child can do, and you have absolutely no idea how different it will be to homeschool. And every once in a while people do go back to schooling, the parents choose, but a lot of people I know say they had no idea how much they would love it. So so if you look in that box links, there's number 3 is my gifted links page on my website. I wrote this book for the NAGC called Exploring Homeschooling for Your Gifted Learner, which you can get as an ebook or paper book, and it's I don't know if this is clickable. Oh, it is. Is it clickable? I can't tell. And my book, From School to Homeschool, is about changing from a school-based mindset to a homeschool-based mindset. I also cover a lot about homeschooling twice exceptional children, curriculum, that sort of thing, just more in-depth than exploring homeschooling. And I teach at Athena's, and one of the things I'm doing at Athena's that is so fun this year is I'm having a monthly parent support group. So not just for homeschoolers, for any parents of gifted children. So if you are not homeschooling yet or don't even think you will, then you can still come. It's once a month on Monday evenings, and you can go to athenasacademy.com and take a look. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. You can contact me through my website. And this is just sort of really, yes, in my book you can click on the number 2 link and get my book. And if you click on the number 1 link, you can get this list. A to Z Homeschooling is a big comprehensive homeschooling website. Hoagie's is a big gifted website, but I have a link here to their homeschool information. I love Sandra Dodd is a dedicated unschooler, radical unschooler. However, her page on deschooling is really wonderful, even if you're not a radical unschooler. And I'm going to look at this comment, which is long, and I think we're out of time. Yes, and so A. Thompson says, you're the best person to socialize your kids. You know your child better than anyone. And that's the thing that is really important to remember, that teachers can be very helpful. They can be wonderful and important people in your child's life, but you really are the person who knows your child the best. And homeschooling helps you develop that relationship in a deeper way, and it can be such a joy. So thank you, everyone, and I'm guessing I'm going to say this is the official end, and if it's okay with Robin, I can chat more with people if you have any more questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Suki. This was terrific. You can absolutely, I can keep the page open if you want to continue to chat a bit. Otherwise, people are free to disconnect and or stay on and open up the links and print out the materials that they would like. But
okay, great.
Please join me in thanking Suki for sharing her expertise with us today. This was just really terrific. So thanks again.
You're welcome. It was really fun to be here. And to answer A. Thompson's comment, yes, there are some homeschoolers who don't appropriately socialize their kids. And I have to say that I've known some, and those kids probably would not have been appropriately socialized in school either, because their families were dysfunctional in one way or another, and homeschooling didn't really cause any more problems than the child probably already had in his or her life. And that's, I know that, there are horror stories. Of course there are horror stories about everything. There are horror stories about schools, and there are horror stories about homeschoolers who have done terrible things to their kids. But we know that you're not one of them because you're concerned about doing the best thing for your child. So you shouldn't be concerned about, will I become one of these terrible people who don't appropriately socialize their child? Well, no, if you're concerned about it, you definitely won't become one of those people. How do you prove that your child has met requirements needed to move on to the next level of education? Yes, so when you have a younger child, you simply just enroll them in the grade that they would have been in if you never went to public school. Generally, you can just go in and, the school might require your child to take a test if you want to put them in a higher grade. But a lot of times they won't even notice that you just fill out which grade that, that's what I said, what I did, and nobody ever questioned it. So, but if you were in school before and your child has accelerated past the grade that they're going to return to, then you might have to fight to get them in the same way you would with accelerating within if you had stayed in school, and it really depends. When you're talking about an older child, if your older child has been homeschooling and wants to go into their age grade in high school, generally you're going to be fine unless, if your child might find that they have some remediation if you haven't kept up on certain things that school thinks are important. The school thinks is important that maybe you and your child didn't think was terribly important. A lot of times things like, homeschoolers don't tend to get good at things like note-taking, listening to lectures, unless they do that in homeschool. So you might need to work on organizational skills, that sort of thing. But when we're talking about gifted kids, for the most part, the big fight will be if you want to get them into a higher grade than their age level. And that's just something that happens whether you're in homeschool or whether you stay in school. And you just have that fight, right? So, depending on your school system, the fight is different. And then the question about moving from homeschool to college, it's the same problem that any kid will have moving from one type of schooling to another. High school is not necessarily the best preparation for college, to tell you the truth, because in high schools, most high schools, there's a lot of hand-holding that goes on. And I can tell you that I have taught in community colleges and at four-year universities. And one community college I taught in, I will never forget the day that I was talking to it was the first day of class, and I was talking them through, they were, mostly 18-year-olds who hadn't done very well in high school. And I said, the important thing to remember about college is that nobody's making you be here. You don't have to be here. And so these two sassy boys stood up and said, what, we don't have to be here so we can just walk out? And I said, of course. And so they did. And the next day we had class. They walked back in, they're sort of hanging their heads, and they said, Coach said we have to come to class. So that was, the high school clearly didn't prepare them for college. There is a lot of hand-holding that gets done in high school, and a lot of people get to college and are really lost, whereas a lot of homeschoolers start slowly. They'll take one community college class when they're 13, another when they're 14, then maybe they'll take two when they're 16. So a lot of times homeschoolers are much more prepared for college. R. Wang asks, any special paperwork or credit proof for junior high? What you do to prove what you're doing in homeschool depends on two things. One is the legal requirements of your state. So like I said, in California, if you have a child who is homeschooling through what we call the private school affidavit, where you file an affidavit with the state saying that you are a private school, the answer is nothing, zero, nada, nothing. So you don't have to prove anything in California. A lot of states, your child is going to be having, even if they're homeschooled, to take standardized tests. Some states, you might have to use certain curriculum when you're homeschooling. In California, we don't have to do anything unless you're associated with a public school homeschool program. As far as going back to school, no. If you're going back from homeschooling, generally, unless you're asking to enroll in a much higher grade than your child was in before, that you just enroll them. And they might want, a teacher, if you have a good school and good teachers, they might want to see a portfolio of work, and that would be great to give them. Certainly when my daughter started back to school in 6th grade, I put a note in with her registration asking her teacher to call me because I didn't know who her teacher was going to be. And he called me, and we had a great conversation about her special needs, and he was wonderfully supportive, and I gave him, he said, please give me all the information I need to help her be successful. So it was a fabulous experience. I'm not saying that you guys will all have that fabulous experience, unfortunately. And I'm looking at what A. Thompson is saying. Yeah, so as long as you do high school in a way that prepares your child for going to college, then you're going to be fine. Now, if you have a child who has severe issues, I have known some homeschoolers who have children who have some pretty severe emotional trauma, and their children are probably not prepared to go to college at the age of 18, and they're going to have to take it more slowly. And unfortunately, in the wide world out there, everybody notices that homeschooler who's not doing well in college. All the other homeschoolers, they don't even notice. My son says nobody even knows he's not 18 in his classes at our community college. They're always surprised when he says he's a homeschooler because, he seems like this bright guy who's, into the class and doesn't seem like a high schooler at all. So, physically speaking, kids at the age of 18 are all over the map developmentally, so he would be a young-looking 18-year-old, but there's lots of young-looking 18-year-olds in the world, so nobody even notices him. And so I've answered all the questions in there. Are there any other questions? I see there's still a number of you on the line, so I'm happy to answer any more questions you have. My son right now, by the way, is taking the PSAT right now as we speak, and he is having to skip his two community college classes that he's taking this semester happen on Monday and Wednesday morning, and he's having to skip them because the lovely College Board does not care about homeschoolers. If you homeschool, you'll find this out. And they decided this year not to have a Saturday date for the test because they assume that the school will just offer the test and everybody will be taking it, so all of the classes will be canceled. Well, no, that's not the way it works. So he had to tell his teachers he would be missing class. And so this is one of the things that happens with homeschooling is you find out how unusual you are, that the College Board will make this decision, or say our state science fair decided to move the state science fair last spring and this year also to coincide with final exams at the community colleges in our state. Because it's not on their radar that this could be a problem. Why would a high schooler be taking community college classes? Well, all homeschool high schoolers who are advanced take community college classes. So anyway, any other questions? Thank you all for coming. It was really fun to talk to you. And like I said, please feel free to get in touch with me outside of the webinar. And if you have any interest in in doing the support group, you can go on Athena's and take a look. It's a lot of fun. It's basically like this, except that you guys would be able to talk too, because it's through Blackboard Collaborate. So everybody has their headset on and we all chat. It's really fun. All right, thanks everybody.